Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So, we find ourselves this week in the heart of the Exodus story. We've been working our way up to it these past few weeks, but this week and next week, we really start to see that moment or those moments where everything begins to change. And so there are two main sections of this week's Torah portion. One is looking at the penultimate plague, the second to last plague, the ninth plague, that of Choshech, that of darkness. And the other is actually the first Passover, right? The first time we are commanded by God, in the midst of everything that's going on, to remember and to do certain things that are going to help us remember the Passover story. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Passover when I'm speaking to Ethan later on. Now, I want to talk about Choshech. I want to talk about the plague of darkness. Because if we think about it, the plagues are supposed to be a progression, right? In the beginning, you start off with some of the easier, lighter ones, and as Pharaoh's heart continues to be hardened, and as he continues to say no, it gets worse and worse and worse until we ultimately end up with the final plague, which is the death of the firstborn. So if this is the ninth plague, this has got to be a really intense, a really difficult plague if it's the second to last one. And yet often we say to ourselves, well, darkness, what's the big deal? Just light a candle. Turn on a flashlight, right? We all know how to deal with darkness. And so the rabbis struggle to try and figure out what is it about this plague and this darkness that made it so horrifying and so terrifying and such a difficult plague. I don't know, have you thought about that? Is that something that maybe you have an answer to? What could it have been about this darkness that made it so much worse? And we know, for most people, right, we have an instinctive, inherent fear of darkness. Some people overcome it, some people don't. But what was it about this that made it so insidious? Marge?
Well, continued darkness is really bad for your biorhythms. And so that you could be kind of thrown off, and the fear that it's never going to end.
Nice. So Marge says that continued darkness is really bad for your biological rhythms, right? We need those times of light and darkness. It works both ways, by the way, right? If we don't have darkness, we don't get good sleep. If it's only darkness, it messes things up. We need those patterns, and when it goes on for a period of time, and the Torah says, we're going to look at it in a second, when the Torah says it's 3 days of constant darkness, that's pretty terrifying. It not only messes up your biorhythm, but maybe, as Marge said, you're afraid it's not going to ever come back. The light will never come back again. Maybe that's part of the fear. What else?
The centrality of the sun god in Egyptian mythology. So maybe it was the ultimate saying that your whole system is not suicide.
Yes, so there's definitely quite a lot of scholarship that shows that the plagues, in a very real way, attack the theology of ancient Egyptian culture. And what is the ultimate theology, right? The ultimate god in the pantheon is Ra. It's the sun god. And therefore, darkness really overturns that. It is a direct attack on the central theology, the central belief system of Egyptian culture. And that could be very terrifying to think that your most powerful God has now been defeated. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. What else? Well, go ahead, Diana.
One of the words that really stuck out to me yesterday when I was actually reading the Parsha was in verse 22. It's not just Hoshech, like we say Hoshech, but page 377 rather. And it says, Vayed Hoshech Gadol Shemaim, Vayed Hoshech Afela. And then I was thinking about the prayer Aleinu, and we say, Ume Afela.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
So let's look at it. Yes.
a different type of, it's not just this physical darkness, it's a whole state almost of darkness.
Good. So let's actually look at the text. Excellent. That's exactly where we were going to go. We're on page 376. 376 in the larger red books that are in front of you. Exodus chapter 10. We're going to start verse 21 at the very bottom of the page. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched." Moses held out his arm towards the sky, and a thick darkness descended upon all of the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was, but all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. So we start to see, and I think you're right, Diana, right? We start to see this isn't just your normal darkness. Not only is the time frame a lot longer, it lasted for 3 days, but we see two qualifying statements, right? Two descriptive statements. A darkness that can be touched and a thick darkness. It's saying this is different than what we normally experience. And so Rashi, our most famous commentator, right, takes first crack at it, and he writes as follows. This signifies that it shall darken for them the natural darkness to a higher degree than the darkness of night. So the darkness of night shall become more black and more dark. So we know, even at night, even when we're out in the desert, right, and we don't have all of this light pollution around us, there's still light. You can still see a little bit. You can make out figures. You can get from maybe one side of the room to the other, right? You wake up in the middle of the night, and there's always a little bit of light. There's something that helps you get from one side to the other. Unless you find yourself in a sensory deprivation chamber, if you've ever done that, you're going to understand what this thick darkness is, right? When there's truly, truly no perception of any light. That's a different sort of feeling. And if you think about it, it really ties into those fears that we have of blindness, right? Of not being able to see anything at all. It's not just that it's dark. It's I can't perceive anything. I don't know if there's a person standing next to me or not standing next to me. And if there is, I don't know if that is a friend or an enemy. It plays with your mind when it's that dark. And so Rashi, I think, is kind of going down that path of saying this was a natural darkness, but it was a supernatural, right? It was an extension of the natural darkness that was there so that it was even darker. Mark.
As I'm reading through this, I don't know what the Hebrew version says, but from the English translation, to me this is a perfect description of depression. So where a lot of the other plagues were physical, this now comes into the emotional, in essence, of people.
Excellent. What Mark says, which is where we're going to get to by the end of all of this, is that perhaps this darkness doesn't just affect us on a physical level, but it affects us on an emotional, spiritual level, right? This is an accurate, I don't know about great, but an accurate description of depression. And maybe that's something that ties into this as well, and we are going to get to that. Milt.
We've all had the experience when we're traveling of waking up in the morning darkness that basically sucks up all the light with nothing. People didn't know where they were, they didn't know what was up and what was down, they couldn't get up from their beds, they had spatial disorientation.
Yeah.
So they were depressed, lost, they had, and also hopeless for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? That when I'm just repeating it for the people that are listening online, that when you're traveling, we've had the experience where you wake up and you're completely disoriented for a few moments. You don't know where you are. That sense of not knowing where up is and down is and where you are and is it safe, is it not safe? All of those sorts of things pile in all at once. And it's a very powerful feeling and a very frightening feeling.
Something else that kind of stuck out at me was it wasn't like all of a sudden it just turned dark. Like if you go to verse 15 on page 376, it says they hid all the land from view and the land was darkened and they ate up all the grasses. So we're already kind of seeing this like foreshadowing of this darkness, and it just follows the trajectory. I mean, first they had the first 7 plagues already, or actually 8 by this point.
Right.
And so their animals weren't doing well. They had lice, they had boils, they had all this hail coming down. So things really weren't looking very good for them. And it was just like, oh my God, can't take it. They just
Right.
shut down.
It-
It's like they completely shut down, even to the point it's very visual. Like in the Hebrew it says, Lo Rahu Ish, they physically couldn't see, Rahu, and Lo Shamu Ish Mitamtav, like they just couldn't even get up from like underneath that. Like
Right.
they were just stuck.
It was an overwhelming blow on top of the 8 others that they had just sort of gone through. And while the other ones certainly had divine connection and divine purpose, they were still part of the natural world, right? This one really overturns the natural world, right? Boils happen. Now, they may not happen at that moment. They may not happen to everybody. They may not, life happens, right? These things happen. I think what Rashi is trying to say here is, yes, darkness happens, but not this darkness. This was different.
And they were alone. They couldn't even see each other.
Correct. So let's see. Sforno, another one of the commentators, reads it as follows, right? This removes the normal darkness called night. So this is actually taking the place of that. The reason this was necessary was that night consists of air ready and capable to absorb light in the morning. Okay, Sforno may not know physics very well, all right? Right, but this idea of, he's trying to say that there's something about the normal nighttime, that even though the light kind of goes away, in the morning, it's able to come back, right? Again, his knowledge of physics is not the best, okay? And the reason for the inability of this was the density and the texture of this darkness. So this darkness, and this is the thickness, right? This darkness was so heavy, it was impossible for light to actually interact with it, to permeate it. I also get this sense of a heaviness, like people couldn't get up because it was as if you had one of those really heavy blankets on top of you, right? That was sort of the feeling of this darkness. It was oppressive, right? It was just weighing down on everybody. And then, in a more modern interpretation, I actually want to direct your attention to the commentary that's right here in Eitz Chaim. And if you look down at note 23 on 377, we start to see what Mark was saying, right? During all the other plagues, the average Egyptian could do nothing to end them. During a plague of darkness, however, could the Egyptians not light a candle? Perhaps the plague was not a physical darkness, a sandstorm or solar eclipse, right? Perhaps it was a spiritual or psychological darkness, a deep depression, right? The word melancholy comes from a Greek root meaning dark mood. People suffering from depression lack energy to move about, to be concerned with anyone other than themselves, precisely as the Torah describes the Egyptians. Maybe this plague was so insidious because it no longer dealt with the physical world, but it dealt with the emotional and spiritual world. Maybe this darkness wasn't about whether or not I could see, but the fact that there's light out there is irrelevant to someone if they can't see through the weight of that depression, if they can't see through the weight of that spiritual darkness. Lauren.
We have 135 hostages living under these same conditions. Darkness, and they can't even see, where they are, or having depth perception and nothing. So, I mean, it's so apropos.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. I was going to connect that as well. You know, it's okay. No, it's perfect. The situation in Israel, and we actually see it on both sides. Lauren, you were speaking about the 100+ hostages, right, who are dealing with this. Their families are dealing with a darkness and this inability to move. When Debbie and I were there, we were in Kikar HaChatufim, Hostage Square, where many of the families are staying. And they're there every day. They're sitting there, waiting, unable to move, unable to get on with their life, unable to do anything because the weight of the situation is on them. The power of emotional, spiritual darkness is something that we dare not neglect. And whether we're talking about those people who have a medical condition of depression, we can't just say, this is sadness, they'll get over it, you buck up, all those sorts of things that we used to say. We recognize the fact now, this is serious. This is serious, and the people that are in that place can't find their own way out. They need help. They need help. Whether we think about it for them, whether we think about it for those people who are currently dealing with the very unique and horrific darkness of having their families in a hostage situation and unsafe for a lot more than 3 days, right? Now we're, over 100. It's something that is still in this world. And I think that's where I wanted to leave us today. We think about these plagues as things that, it happened a long time ago. It's happening today. It still happens today. The plague of darkness occurs, not at the level, not at the expanse of what happened in Egypt, but neither did the others. And that's what I wanted to start to say, right? Yes, there are lice in the world, but everybody doesn't get it all at the same time. Yes, there are boils. Yes, animals die from disease. Those things happen, but they're limited and they're focused and they only affect 1 or 2 people at any given time. But this darkness, it's still there. It's still a part of our reality. And we need to take it seriously. And we need to understand that when we perceive someone in that place, this is the penultimate plague. This is the second to last plague. This is as bad as it gets. And we need to be there to help those people in any way that we can. They may not be able to bring a candle, but we might be able to. Shabbat Shalom.